My name is Ted Clement. I'm the Executive Director of Save Mount Diablo. Today we have a special gift of gratitude and inspiration for you. This afternoon's Zoom presentation entitled The Hunt for Brewer, Buckwheat, and Bowerman by Seth Adams, our legendary land conservation director. Seth will share with us the incredible story of the rediscovery of the Mount Diablo buckwheat on land conserved by Save Mount Diablo many decades after it was thought extinct. William Brewer of the Whitney, California Geological Survey was the first person to document the Mount Diablo buckwheat in writing in 1862. Then in 1936, Save Mount Diablo co-founder Mary Bowerman was the last person to document seeing the buckwheat alive until its incredible rediscovery many years later. Seth will do a great job bringing the story to light for you, and I know we all look forward to his presentation. I just want to give some more gratitude to you, our supporters. Gratefully, because of your wonderful support of Save Mount Diablo, our staff continue to work hard on conserving our critical Mount Diablo natural areas here. Together, we will continue to do great things to protect the ultimate foundation for our long-term health and well-being, nature. And again, we just cannot thank you enough for the support you give us, the way you enable us to protect the incredible Mount Diablo area. Seth, we thank you for providing this gift of gratitude and inspiration to our supporters. Please take it away. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy.
Okay, great. As I said, we're going to start with talking about Save Mount Diablo in brief and some of our current projects. You know, we were founded in 1971, and at the time, there was just a small 7,000 acre state park up at the top of Mount Diablo. It didn't even include North Peak, and the founders didn't really know what they were doing. All they knew was that they had to do something to try and deal with the subdivisions that were creeping up onto the mountain slopes. Mary Bowerman was one of the co-founders along with Art Bonwell. And over the years, the organization became more and more successful. Our mantra is preserve, defend, restore, enjoy. We acquire land directly, like Brewer and North Peak on the side of Mount Diablo, which we hope will be added to Mount Diablo State Park within the year. 165 acres, one of the highest parcels left in the county to be added to parks. We also work with park agencies to help them acquire land, to encourage them to acquire land. On December 31st, we announced our Conquered Mount Diablo Trail Ride Association property, 154 acres on the side of North Peak. Something we can only do with the help of the Trail Ride Association, which has equestrian activities on their property up there. Most of their activities are located in a smaller parcel below the red one there that we're going to be protecting with the conservation easement. In the same missing mile of North Peak, we have the North Peak Ranch and Young Canyon, which are Save Mount Diablo projects. So here's the trail ride property, literally on the slopes of North Peak. Brenda and Steve Binkley, who were 5 years in on a 10-year installment plan for the 87 acre North Peak Ranch just below trail ride. You can see both of those on the map in the next image here. And you can also see down a little bit further to the southeast, our Smith Canyon project, which we signed the deal on just as the COVID sheltering in place was starting, and had to do all the work to protect that property from due diligence to sheltering, to escrow, to checking out potential conflicts, the fundraising. All of that had to happen while we were sheltering it in place. And what a great project it is. How often in a single project do you get to protect an entire canyon? It's a practical access into Curry Canyon and Mount Diablo State Park. And it's just a sublime little property. We couldn't do any of this stuff without the help of our supporters. Preserve, defend, restore, enjoy. One of our first battles was the proposed Black Hawk development on the south side of Mount Diablo. Ultimately, we were able to protect 5/6 of the 6,500 acre ranch. And that protected the whole south side of Mount Diablo, the area known as the Black Hills. In March, the voters approved the McGee Preserve project, also in the Danville area. 93% open space with a very small development down at the bottom of the property, over a mile of Green Valley Creek, and connecting to Sycamore Valley open space. Really an incredible thing. Last July, we celebrated the first 2,300 acres of a brand new regional park between Concord and Pittsburgh. Concord is the last city in the East Bay that doesn't have a regional park. And this is a significant piece of the Concord Naval Weapons Station. Just a few weeks ago, we celebrated the approval by East Bay Regional Park District of the land use plan for the Concord Naval Weapons Station Regional Park. The name hasn't been decided yet. And this is the necessary last step before the Park District can open up parts of the Naval Weapons Station, probably that area to the right of Bailey Road, can open that up to the public for public access. So our hope is that in the next year or so, the first 900 acres out of 2,500 acres of the Concord Hills Regional Park will open to the public. What's nonetheless threatening, and I think one of the things that points out over and over how important Save Mount Diablo and the East Bay Regional Park District and our partners are to the health of the East Bay, is that at the same time that we're working on creating a new regional park between Concord and Pittsburgh, there's a proposed 1,500 unit development that could be on the ridge line of Pittsburgh, right above this new regional park. Or does the park get expanded onto the Pittsburgh side, allowing great access for Pittsburgh residents as well? And Save Mount Diablo, East Bay Parks, and others are working to try and make this a less impactful development. We're busy during the sheltering in place period. Not only were we at the Pittsburgh Planning Commission by Zoom last night, we were also at the Antioch Planning Commission over a development proposal there. And you may know that we've been working on an initiative for the last 2 years to try and protect a significant part of the Sand Creek area. And one part of that was before the Antioch City Council last night. There's an application for the property on the right that's before the city as well. And our initiative is an attempt to slow down growth in the Sand Creek area and lead to a lot more protection. Preserve, defend, restore, enjoy. While we own properties and until we can turn them over to park agencies, we clean them up, we build trails, we remove non-native species. We do all kinds of things so that the properties will be in better shape in order to turn them over to a park agency. This is Thomas Home Ranch, also on the edge of Pittsburgh, and this was a big cleanup project. Here's a tree restoration project on the Irish Canyon property on the edge of Black Dino Mines. Many people know, and next month we'll be doing a program about the return of the endangered peregrine falcon to Mount Diablo, something that Save Mount Diablo led in the late 80s and early 1990s. And there are a bunch of new parts of the story that are really incredible and inspiring. So we'll have a presentation on August 19th about peregrine falcons that we hope you'll tune into. Here's some baby falcons. Falcons come back to Mount Diablo nearly every year now. And that's quite a success story considering that they disappeared in the 1950s on Mount Diablo. Preserve, defend, restore, enjoy. We take people out on the land in all kinds of ways. We show them how they can enjoy the areas that we've helped protect, and we show them the areas that are threatened. And even though it's been difficult for the last 4.5 months, as a lot of events had to be canceled and postponed, we're now starting to do small small socially distanced tours again with up to 10 people. And everyone knows that one of the things that has made our quality of life as incredible as it is, and that's made sheltering in place bearable for many of us who are outdoors oriented, is the incredible juxtaposition of open space in our urban areas, that all of us can get to an open space in the East Bay in under 5 or 10 minutes. We have one of the most integrated systems of open spaces, especially regional parks, in our urban areas of any place in the world, and it's made all the difference. In the meantime, if you're not getting out very much, you can also look at our Audible guides, which tell you about the various places around Mount Diablo. They're kind of like museum guides walking through a park along a particular loop trail, and what you'll see, what the natural and cultural history is. So the bottom line on what Save Mount Diablo's work has meant is that in 1971, with Highway 680 on the left there and Highway 580 on the south, these were the parks that existed. Mount Diablo near Central County. That same year, Contra was created up at the edge of Antioch, and far off to the right, the first open spaces along Bethany Reservoir and Clifton Court Forebay of the State Water Project. In 2018, it looked like this. We'd gone from 7,000 acres to 120,000 acres, most of it connecting in a big 70-mile donut stretching all the way from Walnut Creek in Central County out to the Central Valley. The parks are following the ridges and valleys that trend southeast down into the rest of the Diablo Range, and we're continuing to do that work because ultimately we know that if Mount Diablo is cut off from the rest of the Diablo Range, it'll lose a lot of its wildlife, it'll lose a lot of its distinctiveness. The problem is most people don't even know what the Diablo Range is, so we're starting to popularize the area. It's 150 miles stretching from the Carquinez Strait all the way down to Antelope Valley in Kern County. A year ago, we started a process of expanding the area within which we work from not just Contra Costa County and part of Alameda, but to the entire 3-county part of the northern Diablo Range, while also working to popularize the entire 12-county, 150-mile full Diablo Range. And the Bay Nature article that we did in March was the first time there had ever been an article published about the entire Diablo Range. It included the first map showing all the public lands of the Diablo Range. And if you take a look at it, many of you will be getting it in your mailboxes in the next couple of weeks. You'll find out that this is an incredibly diverse area. It's the largest concentration of golden eagles in anywhere in the world, and it's kind of a mountain lion, golden eagle, California condor freeway leading up half the state. So we hope that you'll learn with us about the Diablo Range and why, while we've been able to protect 75% of the area that we think is important north of Highway 580, only 24% of the entire Diablo Range has been protected. And that's going to be a big job. We're going to do something about that, and we're going to help improve that situation. Here's that first ever published public lands map of the Diablo Range in the March Bay Nature magazine. We'll be sending you copies of it, many of you soon, or you can request it from us. Just last week, we have a little bit of news. Many of you may have heard of the 50,500 acre N3 cattle ranch, which is 50% larger than the city of San Francisco, stretches across 4 counties from Corral Hollow in San Joaquin down to Stanislaus, almost to Henrico in Santa Clara County, and back up to Del Valle in Alameda. It's a huge project, listed at $72 million originally, and we were helpful in a meeting last week where the Nature Conservancy is leading the charge on this. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's going to take many different kinds of partners, including Save Mount Diablo, East Bay Parks, state parks, etc. But another $5 million towards that purchase price was approved last Friday, and progress is continuing to be made on the N3 Ranch. There is no deal yet, but funding is being put together from a lot of partners, and cross your fingers. We hope that this will be one of the most important acquisitions in our lifetimes. 80 square miles, twice the size of Mount Diablo State Park easily, twice the size of Pinnacles National Park. That gives you an idea of its scale. Now we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about rarity. Everybody knows the California grizzly bear. It's a tragedy because it's extinct. And when we talk about rarity, sometimes people have this sense of, the environmentalists, they're always talking about rare species and, you know, is it overblown? And is it just, do they care about every little fish, every little insect? What we care about is diversity and biodiversity, and rare species are both canaries in a coal mine um, telling us about the health of the ecosystem and all the other species that can live there if they can too. And they're incredible repositories of genetic information. Imagine that a species of wildflower basically represents 50,000 years of evolutionary data. And a single species is the equivalent genetically of the Library of Congress in terms of information. These species have evolved to live in specific places, and we don't even know what they mean or how important they are to the ecosystem in a lot of cases. But rare species in general are an indicator of the health of the ecosystem. If they can survive, then most of the other more common species can survive. And it's not just that we talk about rare species all the time, it's that California and a few places in the United States have an especially large concentration of rare species. In California, it's because we have complicated geology that results in all kinds of opportunities, complicated weather, complicated topography. And the result is that after Hawaii, California is one of 2 or 3 biggest hotspots of the numbers of rare species in the entire country. And if you look at California more closely, these are endangered species. Just in the East Bay, we have at least 100 or 200 rare or endangered species. A lot of them are plants. And if you look at just the East Bay, you can see that Eastern Contra, Costa, and Alameda County have an especially large concentration of rare species too. This is kind of an aside, but one of the things that has happened as a result of that, all of the conflicts between rare species that we want to see survive and the incredible development pressure in the East Bay is that in 2007, we helped create the East Contra Costa Habitat Conservation Plan. And it's basically a way to force developers to pay fees to help preserve large amounts of land. The result is in the last 20 years, we've helped protect more than 14,000 acres just with the HCP, the Habitat Conservation Plan. But in the last 30 years, we've helped protect almost 40 or 50,000 acres on the east side of Mount Diablo, helping connect the regional and state parks with Los Vaqueros and so on, and just protecting land so fast that we don't even know what's there in some cases. We're just getting on top of doing all the biological surveys that'll tell us more and more about the richness of these various properties. The basic idea with conservation biology is you want to preserve as big an area as possible, because if there's a fire or some kind of disaster, you may lose a species, but the bigger the park, the more likely a species can connect back into the area that was damaged or burned. Imagine even on the scale of a landslide could take out a rare plant that has a very limited range. So bigger parks are better, connected parks are better. The more edge there is, the bigger the problem in terms of impacts coming in. And so we want to protect as many parks as we can, make them as big as possible, and connect them as much as we can. We've got a lot of rare species, as I said, and there's rareness in all kinds of different ways. There may be rare locally. We've only had two sightings of a roadrunner, which is found throughout the Southwest and certainly down the San Joaquin Valley. We've only had 2 sightings in Contra Costa in the last 20 or 30 years. So that's a locally rare species. There are species that are limited because of the kinds of habitat they live in, like these California horned lizards found at just 3 or 4 places on Mount Diablo. So these are species that are in danger of disappearing locally if they're wiped out in some way. There are species that are found over a broad area, but are declining, and we don't always know why. So burrowing owls, for example, are declining in number. San Joaquin kit fox have lost most of their habitat to farmland in the Central Valley, and they're found pretty much just along the western edge of the Central Valley, along the eastern side of the Diablo Range. And they're federally endangered. That's the highest category of rareness. They're disappearing from more and more areas from all kinds of reasons, and the only way to protect them is by preserving large contiguous expanses of grassland. That's why a lot of work is being done on the east side of the Diablo Range to protect habitat. California red-legged frog, the famous jumping frog of California, was once found over a third of the state, and has declined to the point that a few places like Mount Diablo are the strongholds of this threatened frog. Same with the Alameda whip snake. There are whip snakes found throughout the Diablo range, but this one's found just in 2 counties, Alameda and Contra Costa County. Plants are even harder to get a handle on in a lot of ways because unlike an animal which either lives or doesn't live, plants may be completely gone from an area but still preserved in the seed bank of the soil. So botanists don't get quite as freaked out when a plant doesn't show up for a while because you know, there's so many nooks and crannies in the topography and landscape of California that they're always hoping that if a plant hasn't been seen in a while, that it'll show up on a good rain year or that it'll be found again. So there are hundreds of rare plants in the Mount Diablo area, like the Brewer's dwarf flax I showed you. Some of them are based on climate change over geologic periods. The coulter pine here may be a relic of a period when these pines moved up from Southern California and then became more rare as the climate changed. And then we have what are called endemics, plants that are only found in a specific area. The specific area may be California, and California has because of all of its complicated climate, weather, geology, it has a very, very rich biodiversity of plants. Or it might be limited to a much smaller area. This is the Mount Diablo jewel flower. And here are 4 endemics just found in the Mount Diablo area. We have 12. The Diablo manzanita here, the Diablo sunflower, the Mount Diablo globe lily, and these are the real rare ones. They may be common on Mount Diablo, but they're found in such a small localized area that if we don't protect their habitat, they will disappear. So, moving into a little bit of the history of Mount Diablo, everybody understands that Mount Diablo has a complicated geology, and it's got a very rich plant community, over 800 species. It represents more than 10% of all of the native plants in all of California. So it's a very rich area, and we spent a lot of time protecting land on the main peaks. We've also spent a lot of time creating regional parks and other open spaces in the foothills surrounding it. But a lot of that landscape has changed since the gold rush and since agriculture became widespread in California because of the introduction of non-native plants. California is a rugged place. Biologists have spent a lot of time, botanists have spent a lot of time exploring it, but some areas have been explored more than others, and there's always new discoveries to be found. Our story of the Mount Diablo buckwheat starts with William Brewer, and he was the leader, basically, of the California Geologic Survey in the 1860s. Soon after the state was formed, soon after the gold rush, the legislator wanted to create a geologic survey to go out and find the mineral riches of California and map where these kinds of things were at. But these were scientists coming from a variety of different backgrounds, and so they weren't just looking at minerals, they were looking at plants. Brewer was a botanist, for example. They were making maps, measuring elevations, naming things, and they came to Mount Diablo 4 times. Here they are camped on the edge of Clayton. We think that's Mount Zion there before the quarries. That little wagon and to the right isn't a covered wagon for storing materials. It's actually a dark room for developing glass images that they're taking with early cameras. So the Whitney Geologic Survey was attracted to Mount Diablo because a number of people thought it was the key to understanding the geology of California. But coal had also been discovered in a couple of places nearby, and they wanted to look at the coal deposits in what we now know as the Black Diamond Mines area. Here's Nortonville on one side of the hill, Summersville's on the other side. There were also some lime deposits that had been found in the area. With coal, you can do manufacturing, so that's really important to the development of a state. You need lime for mortar and cement and stucco, and that's the important mineral for transitioning a city from easily burnable wood to other kinds of less flammable materials. You need both of those things to have kind of a modern city, and that's why the Mount Diablo area was especially important. when I said that Mount Diablo was the key to understanding the geology of the state, I'm not kidding. It's got all kinds of reasons that it has very complicated geology. You can see the different kinds of mineral deposits here, from the sediments in bright yellow to the center of Mount Diablo to the center left, with ancient ocean rocks that have been carried here from thousands of miles away. And the crux of why geology matters for this story is that complicated geology breaks down into complicated soils, and complicated soils support really rich plant diversity. The upshot of this is that any place that's got a lot of geology, you're going to go there to look for a lot of plants. And Brewer was making collections the entire 4 years that they spent exploring the state, covering 18,000 miles. And in a lot of cases, he would press the plants, wouldn't spend much time on them, and would send them back east to various kinds of botanists to name and categorize. He collected hundreds and hundreds of plants. This was one that he happened to collect on May 29th, 1862, somewhere on Marsh's Rancho on the east side of Mount Diablo. That's as distinct as it gets. And the plant was about 6 or 8 inches tall, with flower stalks that were another 6 or 8 inches tall. And this is the first of 7 historic records of the Mount Diablo buckwheat. He sent it back east. It got named, and buckwheats are like a lot of plants in California. There are lots of different species. They evolve to fit differing habitats, and you end up with having endemic species in lots of places, because evolution is happening faster here than in lots of places. So this was just another plant that William Brewer collected. And we don't know if it was so common that other botanists didn't collect very many specimens of it, or if it was so rare that they seldom came upon it. All we know is that only 7 botanists collected and preserved the Mount Diablo buckwheat from 1862 until 1936. This is kind of what the area looked like in the 1870s, and Mount Diablo was starting to attract attention because there was this new idea of taking people out on hiking trails. People were starting to have more leisure time, and Joseph C.V. Hall here proposed the first wagon road up Mount Diablo. The idea was that tourists would come and stay at his Mountain House Hotel, and they would spend weeks sometimes on Mount Diablo and get to know it. And so the Mount Diablo area was starting to attract more people for its natural resources, for its views, for its beauty. This is important because successively two different speculator developers bought up most of the west side of Mount Diablo and locked it up, hoping for big development schemes that ultimately didn't happen. And they literally locked up the west face of Mount Diablo, the area where most people lived, for about 50 years, and slowed down development when their intent was actually development speculation. The first was Robert Noble Burgess. He's famous for creating the first wagon roads halfway up the mountain, and then extending it all the way to the top for use by autos. He proposed the Mount Diablo Estates development on the west face of Mount Diablo. World War I intervened. He was even gonna put a hotel at the top called the Torre del Sol. World War I intervened. He went bankrupt, and the lands that he had gotten control of fell into a variety of different hands, including an old business partner of his named Walter Frick. The state park was first created in 1921, a brand new idea before there was even a state park system. And it started out with a designation legislatively, but it didn't include any land. There was some land that was sort of given to it as an opportunity to buy in the future. But initially the state park was a designation rather than actual ownership. And so there were dedications in 1921, and then again 10 years later when the first acquisitions were bought from a guy named Walter Frick. Frick was the partner of Burgess in another venture, and he bought up 10,000 acres of the west face of Mount Diablo, spent time popularizing it again so that the less developable parts of his property could be used to make the other parts more valuable. He lobbied in Sacramento to create this brand new newfangled thing, the state park. He did all kinds of things to popularize the mountain, auto races. He allowed a tower to be put at the top with a beacon for commercial aviation, what became known as the Eye of Diablo. And he also did something which turns out to be lucky for us. If you look at Frick's land on the mountain, you can see here that he owned the bright green areas, which were the first acquisitions for the new state park in 1931, and he owned the dark gray areas. The green area is the general boundary of Mount Diablo State Park a few years ago, but you can see Frick owned much of the western half of Mount Diablo State Park. And lucky for us, a young botanist named Mary Bowerman contacted Frick and got permission to access Mount Diablo without having to pay to go up the toll roads. Mary was, Canadian English. She had been at Pasadena Women's Junior College, and she moved up to Berkeley to finish her degree and get what she thought was going to be a master's. Here she is on Mount Pinos down in Southern California. And her father wanted her to be a doctor, but she wanted to be a botanist eventually. And at the time, the way botanists did master's studies, where they were assigned a local peak, and they did a flora. They basically did a plant list and explored the botany of that particular area. Why peaks? Because they have complicated geology and also often have rich and diverse botany. Well, Mary was the only graduate student that had a car. And so she was assigned Mount Diablo. She didn't know anything about it, but ultimately she spent hundreds of days there, usually with her mother, who lived to be 108, because it wouldn't have been right for a young woman to be out on the land by herself. So she started exploring Mount Diablo. And here she is wearing her boots and studies with her geology hammer and her collecting bag. She's undoubtedly got a plant press in there. She spent hundreds of days on the mountain to create what ultimately became a PhD thesis in 1936. And here's the first mention we have of Mr. Frick's involvement with this effort, as well as giving him some of the credit for eventually creating most of the state park and selling a lot of his land to it. But in her book, there's a one-line sentence thanking Mr. Frick for permission for accessing the mountain. Well, what's Mary's part of this story? In 1930 and in 1936, she collected specimens of the Mount Diablo buckwheat, one on the south side of the mountain, one on the north side of the mountain. And those were 2 of the 7 records of the Mount Diablo buckwheat that we have. In 1944, she translated her thesis into a book which was published. It became kind of the Bible of Mount Diablo. And this was in her 20s and 30s. She was never what you would call a successful botanist, because her parents were rich. She didn't have to work. She never got a job as a professor at a university, but she spent a lot of time doing botany, managing finances and things like that. And ultimately, she became one of the most important people in the history of Mount Diablo. The map in her book helped become the first state park map. Here's a view platform at the top of the mountain before the summit building was built. And here's what Mount Diablo looked like in the 1940s, at about the time that Mary had completed her thesis and was working on her book. The summit building was built in 1939. Frick's Eye of Diablo was transferred from the tower to the top of the museum. In 1934, we had another important development in the East Bay, which is East Bay Regional Park District was proposed, and that's going to be important for a later part of our story, and for what I said at the beginning, which is we have such an amazing integration of parks and open space in the East Bay that even in a time of sheltering in place, we all have relatively easy access to those open spaces. So in 1971, things looked like this, as I said, when Mary started her work. She was a member of lots of different conservation groups. Development was starting to creep up onto the side of Mount Diablo, and she would go to these conservation groups and say, what are we going to do about Mount Diablo? Ultimately, Art Bonwell helped her start what became Save Mount Diablo, and it's grown over the years to have a significant impact. Now, bear in mind that when Save Mount Diablo started, Mary was in her mid-60s. So she had been working on botany for 30 years. She had been working on conservation in various ways, but she didn't start Save Mount Diablo until she was in her mid-60s, at a time a lot of people think their lives are over. So the inspiring lesson for you should be, no matter how old you are, you can start something big. And you don't have to know what you're doing. You just need to take the first step and then the second step. So those of us who got to know Mary Bowerman knew about the Mount Diablo buckwheat, and no one had seen it since 1936, and people started looking for it again, and it became known as the Holy Grail of Mount Diablo botany. Here's our Mangini Ranch, Save Mount Diablo's Mangini Ranch property on the north side of the mountain. One of the historic records that Mary found of the buckwheat was just at the edge of the Mangini property. And it has a lot of other rare plants like desert olive here and Hospital Canyon larkspur. So we were interested in protecting the property anyway, but one of the real reasons was that Mary had a historic record of the Mount Diablo buckwheat, and it was the missing plant of Mount Diablo. So we started doing work days. I remember writing a fundraising appeal for the Mount Diablo buckwheat, a fundraising appeal for Save Mount Diablo, and talking about Brewer in May of 1862, being on this hill right next to Mangini, and et cetera, and discovering the Mount Diablo buckwheat in a separate place, and that here we were X number of years later, and still looking for the Mount Diablo buckwheat. The most obvious place to look were the places where the historic records have been found, and we couldn't find them. They weren't there. On one of these trips that I helped lead, a botanist came along by the name of David Gowan. And he was kind of relentless. And while we were at the historic site that Mary had recorded, no buckwheat in sight, he looked across to Lime Ridge and he said, similar exposures, similar edge of chaparral, etc. Maybe it's over there. And he started going over to Lime Ridge and spending a lot of time there. Now, Lime Ridge open space is a rich place. Ultimately, we found about 55 rare plant species in just this one small 3,000-acre park. But Gowan started spending time up there, and he didn't find the Mount Diablo buckwheat, but he did find two new little plants that were brand new to science. And imagine that, 3 miles from downtown Walnut Creek, in 2008. He found them a little bit earlier, but they were described and announced to the world in 2008. In 2008, someone can discover and name two new plants right in the middle of an urban area. That only happened because we had helped protect the land. And the same thing was true of the Mount Diablo buckwheat when ultimately it was rediscovered. In 2002, Mary's in her late 80s now, early 90s, and her book gets updated with Barbara Erder. And even as they're publishing the book, Mary's not getting out very much anymore, but even as they're publishing the book, Barbara Erder, her co-author of the second book, is thinking about all of the new lands that Save Mount Diablo has helped protect, that East Bay Parks has helped protect, and thinking, I need to assign graduate students to those new areas to go look for more botany. And one of the places that she assigned were some land Save Mount Diablo had helped protect to a UC Berkeley graduate student named Michael Park. It's 2005, and I get a call from Barbara Erder. And things are exciting right now already because a few weeks earlier, the Nature Conservancy had announced they might have found the Ivory-Billed Woodpecker again. It had been thought extinct since the 1930s. They thought they had gotten sounds of it in some riverside old growth forest in Arkansas. And it was such a big find that it kind of electrified the world. The news went around the world. A lot of time was spent looking at it. They were even protecting thousands of acres just in case it really had been found in this specific area. But it had focused people's attention on rare species. And so when Michael Park um, uh, was on one of his study tours looking for plants, that's kind of the atmosphere that we were in. He'd spent over 100 days in his study area in 2005, and on this particular day, he got a call from his professor, his graduate professor, and the guy had said, "You think you're ever going to find the Mount Diablo buckwheat?" And he said, "I don't think I will. I think somebody will, but it hasn't been seen in 69 years, and someone will find it." That particular day, he did a route through his study area that was kind of backwards than the way he normally did. It's also in May, and he comes upon an area along the edge of chaparral, and he sees a little flower that he doesn't know what it is, and it's small. The Mount Diablo buckwheat record, some of them were 6, 12, 15 inches tall. These are 3 to 4 inches tall. And he looks at it, he knows it's a buckwheat, but he doesn't quite know which kind. And he looks at it and goes through all of the different buckwheats and their different attributes. And finally, he realizes this has to be the Mount Diablo buckwheat. And he was so shocked and overcome by that he stopped thinking about it and continued his hike through the rest of his study area, because his mind was racing and he didn't want to know what to do. Ultimately, he went back, took a couple photos, and he went back and he called Barbara Erder, and she called me. He had found a population of 15 to 20, 3 to 4 inch flowers. They're annuals. They die and come back. They die every year that they grow. We don't know if they grow every year, but they're annual. They live for a few months, set seed, and disappear until the next spring. And these were little diminutive plants along the edge of chaparral. Each flower has a single seed. They can be pollinated by insects, or if they're not pollinated by insects, they can self-pollinate. So even though it's tiny, small plants can produce a lot of seeds, and larger plants can produce a huge number of seeds. Yet it was in this tiny little strip along the edge of chaparral. Well, Barbara called me and she asked, "What do we do about this?" And I said, "Well, we have to announce it, but we have to do it carefully because people will love it to death. And it's so rare. This could be the only location of the Mount Diablo buckwheat on the planet. And there will be someone who wants to see it, who will trample it. There will be someone who wants to collect seed, and so on. And we have to treat it carefully." So we kept it secret. We had one photographer, Scott Kine, go out and take photos, and we kept the number of people who went out to look at it very, very small. Imagine that these 15 or 20 plants could be taken out by a single cow, or by a group of quail, or by someone stepping on them. That's how freaked out we were about this new discovery. It was exciting, and it was also suddenly terrifying. We made the announcement about it in the press release that I wrote. We connected it to the Ivory-Billed Woodpecker as another recently possibly discovered thing. It went around the world in 12 hours. Michael Park's parents lived in Los Angeles, and they read it in the next couple of days in a Korean language newspaper. Jane Goodall called us because she wanted information about it for a book that she was working on. And it went from having a few dozen web entries about the presumed extinct Mount Diablo buckwheat, mostly in environmental impact reports that were lists of things, to having tens of thousands of web answers in just a few days. So it was a big deal. Well, it's 2005. By this time, Mary Bowerman's health is declining. She's fallen. She's broken her hip, and she won't come out of the nursing home that she's at. But I go to visit her, and Michael Park has collected a couple of hundred seeds from the buckwheats. They've sprouted one just to see how easy it is to sprout. And I take a picture of this with me and show it to Mary Bowerman. And I think she's going to be thrilled. She's really actually kind of, not that impressed. And of course, you realize that's because She's seen it before. Nobody else has. We've only seen dried specimens in we've only seen dried specimens in botanical records, and so she's seen it. But what she does ask, so who found it? Barbara, her co-author on the republished book. And I said, no, a graduate student named Michael Park, and that really pleased her incredibly. And the fact that it was found on a piece of land that Save Mount Diablo had preserved really made her excited. But then she moved on to asking about a new property that she thought should be protected. Here's a scientific illustration that was done soon after. And of course, you know, this is one site. We're no longer extinct. We're hovering on the brink of extinction now because a single landslide could take out the whole population. So luckily, the plant has tiny but numerous seeds. So we collected 200 of those seeds. They were taken to the botanical garden at UC Berkeley. And in the first generation, we got 40,000 seeds out of the plants there. In the second generation, we got 200,000 seeds. They're now located in a number of different places to protect in different seed banks. But the wild location remains critically threatened. We're now no longer in danger of extinction, but we may be in danger of extinction in the wild. We had a press conference about the success of the propagation. This was a big deal that we used to talk about preserving land and rare plants and how important they are about the health of the ecosystem. So I'm standing here with a Mount Diablo buckwheat. In a place where it gets watered regularly, it can look almost like a head of lettuce. And the flowers can be really, really numerous. Barbara, Holly Forbes, the botanical garden person who's in charge of this, said it's almost a botanical garden weed. It likes to move around so much, but it's easy to propagate, doesn't need special soils, and that helps move us back from the brink of extinction. So that's great, but we've got a working group that's working on the Mount Diablo buckwheat, and we're still looking at the historic locations. We start looking at things in even more complicated ways, different kinds of soils, different kinds of slopes, trying to see if we can find another location of the Mount Diablo buckwheat. Well, you remember I mentioned the East County Habitat Conservation Plan and using developer fees to acquire a lot of land. During this process, we're working to acquire lots of land between Mount Diablo State Park and Clayton and Black Diamond Mines Regional Preserve. Some of the areas are Irish Canyon, the Barron property, Oil Canyon, Thomas properties. We're acquiring a lot of land on the east side of Black Diamond Mines too as well to connect over through the new Deer Valley Regional Preserve to Los Vaqueros. And if you look at a map of Black Diamond Mines at the Regional Park District, you'll see about 5,000 acres. But in fact, there's about 10,000 acres protected in the Black Diamond Mines area. And we're starting to spend more time looking at it in more detail. We know it's got the rare species that matter. We know it's important habitats, that it's aesthetically gorgeous. But botanists, including Heath Bartosh, who was a Save Mount Diablo board member at the time, start spending a lot of time out on these new lands that are being acquired or have been acquired, looking at the plants and animals that are found there. And then in 2016, lightning struck twice. Heath was out doing a botanical survey of some Black Diamond Mine lands, and he saw a strange color on the hillside, and it attracted his attention. He had never seen it before. Remember that the population on Mount Diablo that Michael Park had discovered was 15 or 20 plants. Even when we scattered some of the seeds we had propagated, we were never able to get the wild population there up above about 200 plants. And it was found in one tiny strip along the edge of Chaparral. Well, this location that Heath found was equally localized. It was two small patches on an eroding hill. But in those two small patches, he estimated that there were about 1 million plants. Because some of them were very tiny, some of them are bigger. They could again be taken out by a single landslide, one person hiking in the wrong place, one cow doing the wrong thing to take out large areas, and they're incredibly localized. They're not just scattered all over in the surrounding area. They're on these two eroding hillsides. And that may be one of the reasons that they're there, because the erosive soils discourage competing grasses and things like that. But they are literally weedy there. And so Michael Park, for the years between 2005 and 2016, used to say he felt like he was on an extinction watch, because any particular year, the Mount Diablo patch could disappear, and then what? And now we've discovered a second site on also preserved land, in part because of the work of Save Mount Diablo and East Bay Regional Park District. And we've stepped back from the brink of extinction. So I hope that you found this story about a big little plant and the botanists who spend time out on the landscape. Here's Keith Bartosh and Brian Peterson, his co-worker from Nomad Ecology. Keith was a board member of Save Mount Diablo, kind of the heir to Mary Bowerman, and we call him a rock star botanist. But Keith and Brian discovered the second location of the Mount Diablo buckwheat. It's in very close proximity to some extremely threatened land by development. And so the story continues. But this is the story of Brewer, Buckwheat, and Bowerman. Thank you. Back, and
Okay.
I hope that you in your house or office watching this presentation, and it's about a big little plant that's going to attract a specialized group of people. But I hope that you'll be inspired by what's out there, that we have such a rich local environment, that it matters so much the work that we're doing, protecting these small properties over and over until they build into big properties, starting whole new parks, connecting parks, and that the signs that it matters come to us all the time. I'm working on another presentation right now, in which I'm going to tell basically 30 great stories in 3 minutes. And I'm thinking about all those different things that I can use to tell people about how cool what we're working on is, that it's ongoing and continuing, and that it happens because of local people supporting Save Mount Diablo, volunteering for Save Mount Diablo, and doing the work to help us keep the doors open, so we can do this years and years of work that ultimately makes the difference in the reason why our area is so great and amazing to live in.
Are there any plans to create a continuous trail from one end of the Mount Diablo range to the other?
It's right here. There is a plan for a continuous trail, and if you've looked at the Bay Nature supplement, you know that one of the names we're using for the Diablo Range is the spine of California, or the spine of Central California. It's the watershed divide between the Salinas River in the Bay and the San Joaquin River on the other side. And you can imagine that there are peaks along that whole spine, that watershed edge already. So the idea of a trail following that spine is obvious. There are fire roads in a lot of locations that do it already. Some of those peaks are public, some of them are private. But the big thing is we need to protect land first before we can piece together those recreational connections. I'm also looking at the chat box here and just a few answers. You can get a copy of the Bay Nature article just by emailing us or calling us, and we'll send you one. Just get the info number for Save Mount Diablo off of our website. And I love this comment from Rick Justin. I love the appeal of the hunt for the missing plant or the missing mile or the unappreciated spine of the Diablo Range. Great storytelling has impact just like great views. And I want you to know that I'm so lucky because I work for Save Mount Diablo, and my history here has been that almost every week, every month, something amazing happens. And it's just such a string of amazing things happening that it's really easy to string together the stories. But we also have these challenges, things like the Sino Faria development above the Concord new regional park. And we have to respond to those. So sometimes the work is long and tedious and hard to explain and complicated or expensive. But we just keep doing the next thing and the next thing and staying positive. And we can't do that without your support. All this work that we're doing, all these amazing things that result is based on your support. And I'm looking down the comments again and saying back to everyone, thank you, everyone.